Okay. Good evening, everybody. All right, let's get started. Tonight's class is, of course, in the merit of all the Jewish people, wherever they may be, especially in the land of Israel, especially those who need healing, need rescuing, and need safe return. Okay, let's get into it. So in this week's Torah portion, we have a very interesting dynamic. We have a blended family dynamic. So let's talk about it. Avram and Sarah were married for 60 years. They had no children. And they obviously, it wasn't just, didn't just want children for their own personal satisfaction or joy, or whatever you may call it. This is also important to the movement they're creating. They're creating a movement of monotheism, will later be called Judaism. And in order to get that movement to have continuity, there has to be progeny. So Abraham and Sarah are praying for children, and they don't have children for 60 years. So Abraham says, Sarah says, listen, why don't you marry my servant, Hagar, and you'll have children through her. So at least we'll have a continuity to our family and our movement. So sure enough, Abraham does that, and a miracle happens, and Abraham, at the age of 90, becomes a father, and not the age of 90, age of 80, I think it was 87, and whatever it was, and I believe it was 87, and Abraham becomes a father. It's pretty old, and he has a son, and they name him Yishmael. Now, 13 years after that, at the age of, so 1 second. So Abraham was, he was 87, so at the age of 99. Get my math. I hope I get my math right. At the age of 99, he has a son with Sarah. That she is herself 90, and they have a son, and they call him Yitzchak. And Yitzchak is, they are told by God that Yitzchak is going to be the true continuity, the true progeny, where this movement of Judaism is going to continue, monotheism, and Sarah is now in charge of educating this boy. And so we have Yishmael is 13 years older than Yishmael. Yishmael is 13 years older than Yitzchak, and they start to have a bad influence in Yitzchak. So let's read inside this week's Torah portion, Genesis chapter 21, verses 9 and 10. Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had born to Abraham, making merry. So what does mean making merry? So our rabbis tell us making merry in the context. Rabbi Akiva said that in the context it means she watched Yishmael build an altar, trap grasshoppers, and sacrifice them to idols. That was Rabbi Akiva says. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi, Aglili, says that she was having illicit relations, and not only that, Sarah actually saw Yishmael climb over a fence and abuse women. So he was a sexually abusing women. And Rabbi Yishmael says actually what Sarah saw was him try to murder Isaac, that he would shoot arrows. He would tell Isaac, "Oh, go this way, and you'll catch the arrows," and he would shoot them and try to kill him. So either way, however you understand it, obviously Yishmael was going to be a bad influence. And so Sarah in verse 10, Sarah says to Abraham, "Drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not inherit with my son with Yitzchak." And Sarah says, "You got to get him out of here." Now, that's a very big ask. So again, this whole thing is Sarah's idea. It's Sarah's idea that Abraham should marry Hagar and have a son with her because Sarah cannot have children. And sure enough, that is what happens. And now she's saying, kick him out. Kick out your teenage son and his mother. And the verse says, Vayera hadavar ma'od be'enei Avraham. Avraham was very, very worried, very upset about the situation. And God says to Avraham, don't be displeased concerning the lad and concerning your maid. Whatever Sarah tells you, listen to her voice. And he says, for it is Yitzchak, Isaac, who will be called your descendant. But I will also make the son of the maid into a nation because he is your progeny. So Avraham is very worried. He doesn't know what to do. Sarah is saying you got to kick him out. But it's his son who wants to kick out their son from their house and his second wife. And God says, no, everything that Sarah says, listen to her. So we have to break down a little bit. What does that mean? Listen to Sarah. Why would we have to? First of all, why listen to Sarah? What does Sarah know better than Avraham? Avraham was no slouch. Avraham is the leader of this movement. Avraham knew good and well what the destiny of Isaac was, of Yitzchak, what the destiny of Ishmael was. Avraham was no fool. Avraham was also a prophet, like Sarah. So why does God say listen to Sarah? So we're going to understand this, we're going to take a step back, or maybe really a step forward, and we're going to analyze a very fascinating story in the book of Numbers. In chapter 20, book of Numbers, we have a very fascinating verse. The verse says, the entire Jewish people arrived in the desert to the desert of Tzin, Midbar Tzin. That was the name of the place, in the first month, and the people settled in Kadesh. Okay, so like we have throughout the story of the Jewish people traveling in the desert, they get to a place, they settle down in this place called Kadesh, and it says Miriam died there and was buried there. And then immediately the verse continues, the people had no water, so they assembled against Moses and Aaron. So again, Jewish people rebel or they complain that there's no water. The question all the commentaries ask, what's the connection between Miriam passing away and there being no water? It's immediate. There's no like a nice ending to the verse. It's Miriam passed away, she's buried, and there's no water. So Rabbi Yossi says in the Talmud Tractate Ta'anit, page 9a, Rabbi Yossi says, the Jewish people had three good stewards, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. Three gifts were granted through them, the well, the clouds of glory, and the manna. The well was in Miriam's merit, the clouds of glory in Aaron's merit, and the manna in the merit of Moses. When Miriam passed away, the well dried up, and it returned in the merit of both of them. When Aaron passed away, the clouds of glory disappeared. They both returned in the merit of Moses. So we see here that the well was in the merit of Miriam, and after she passed away, they had to, what ends up happening, God turns to Moses, and he says to Moses, we all know the famous story, that Moses should go and hit the rock, right? Speak to the rock, and Moses hits the rock, which ends up being kind of the reason why he's not allowed into the land of Israel. So all this drama about the rock all happens after Miriam passed away because the well was specifically in the merit of Miriam. So it's a very interesting thing. Why is the well, first of all, associated with Miriam? And not only that, it's in order for it to come back, there has to be this whole special thing about that God commands Moses, go speak to the rock, and the rock will give water. So, and then Moses hits the rock, and the rock does give water, tremendous miracle. So why did they have to go through this whole thing? Especially, by the way, when it comes to the clouds of glory, we don't see such a thing. So, right, because again, the clouds of glory left when Aaron passed away, and they continued in the merit of Moses. So the question is, first of all, what is the association with water and Miriam? So Maimonides, in his explanation on Mishnayos, Maimonides famously was a doctor, and in his legal works and his commentary on the Mishnah, and as well as his Code of Jewish Law, he discusses some health things as well, as it's relevant to the law. So Maimonides writes as follows: water doesn't nourish the person like food, but it carries the food to necessary places. So in other words, that even though the primary function of water is to actually help the food digest and and it helps the food, the nourishment break down and get to the places where it needs to go. That is what Maimonides says is what the purpose of water in the health and the nutrition of nutrition of a person's body. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe explains this idea in the context of spiritual divine service of God. That it comes to certain things, that there are things that you can understand something, and you could even understand it very well, and you can understand how important it is, but practically it doesn't get to where it has to go. So, for example, you can have a very logical understanding of why you have to do a mitzvah, but it has to get to your hands, has to get to your feet. You actually have to go and accomplish and do the thing. So, that the same thing applies here. That that water, when it comes to the water, is the thing that we have to actually now bring practical applications. We get the food, we get the divine command, and now we actually have to break it down and practically accomplish it. And the Rebbe explains further that the same thing applies to Jewish education. When it comes to Jewish education, the husband and wife, the mother and the father, have different responsibilities. They have the responsibility, number one, there's the responsibility of giving direction. And this is primarily done by the man. And there's many, many different parables to this. Just as an example, in a traditional society, the man will go and work and bring home the food, and the woman, the wife, will actually cook the food and make it edible. If a man comes home and goes to the field and he works hard and he brings home grain, the grain itself is not very useful. It's very hard to digest grain. So what do? You grind it up, you put water in it, you make it into a dough, and you bake it, and then you have bread. And that is the role of the woman. And the same thing applies to Jewish education. And just like the water of the body digesting it, is that the man is the one who gives direction. The man is the one who's studying all day and working, and the man is the one who gives small general direction of this is where we're going. And the mother has to go and actually practically apply the educational practices and instruction that will actually help the child further in his development. And so obviously both very important roles, but when it comes to practically how do you actually educate a child, the woman's going to have the final say. And this is something that this is why Miriam is compared to water, because this is the role of the woman in the house. The role of the woman is to educate her children and really all who come through the home, and to practically apply the lessons and the leadership given by her husband. And we see here, this is why when it came to Avraham and Sarah, that we see that Avraham and Sarah, when there was a conflict of how to educate their child, whether Yishmael had to go or not, God says to Avraham, everything that Sarah says, when it comes to Jewish education, that role in the Jewish home, practically educating a child, you have to listen to Sarah. It has to be the Jewish woman that understands practically how to educate a child. And if she says Yishmael has to go, then Yishmael has to go. And yes, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be complicated, it might even be tragic, but this is what it takes to educate a Jewish child. And this is why we always talk about how the Torah is not a history book, but it's rather a guidebook for us. So when this is a lesson not just for Avraham and Sarah, but for all Jewish education, that it is the role of the woman in the house to practically educate the child, and therefore she has more of a say when it comes to practical ideas. When it comes to guidelines, that is more the role of the husband. Okay, what is our general goals of education? What are we trying to accomplish? We want the child to be balanced. We want the child to be, understand what the Torah says, what the mitzvahs are, etc. But when it comes to practical education, that is the domain of the woman. And that is one of the lessons we can learn from this story. And in a way, like Rashi says on this pasuk, that therefore Sarah had a higher level of nevuah. Sarah had a higher level of prophecy than Avraham, and she was given this in order that she could practically educate her son Yitzchak, who ends up being the father of every single Jew, and the continuity of the Jewish people. And this is the role of Jewish women. Thank you very much for joining. Have a good Shabbos, and we'll see you, God willing, next week.